Move. This line is for people who paid for it. The woman's voice cut through the airport noise, sharp and cold. You're holding up real travelers. Another voice chimed in, quieter but firm, from behind the counter. Ma'am, I'll need to see proof. Platinum or first class only. The woman in front leaned her shoulder and hard. Don't pretend. We both know you don't belong here. It happened in seconds. A nudge that was not a nudge. A hand that was not gentle. A pause in the line that became a circle of eyes. The black woman at the center steadied herself, breath slow, face calm. No scene, no raised voice. She adjusted the strap of her carry-on and lifted her head the way a person does when they decide not to shrink. Where are you from? Have you ever been judged based on your appearance before you even spoke a word? If you believe discrimination has no place in the world, hit that subscribe button and share this story. Her name was Imani Carter. She stood at gate B12 in a clean navy blazer, soft-soled flats, and a ponytail pulled neat and low. She had learned long ago that quiet clothes did not quiet bias. She had learned that good posture did not shield you from small cuts made in public. So she chose dignity over defense, even when it cost her comfort. The woman who shoved past her, Lynn, according to the luggage tag swinging from a quilted tote, had been restless from the moment the agent set out the stanchions. Lynn tossed her hair each time the gate announcements mentioned priority boarding. Each time, she looked over her shoulder at Imani, then down at Imani's shoes, then away again with a small, thin smile. The gate agent glanced up with a bored kind of concern. He looked past Imani as if searching for someone behind her who might solve this awkward moment. The screen above them glowed with the gold letters that said priority, Comfort Plus, Military. The carpet underfoot was a tired blue-green, flattened by millions of shoes that had moved through this place, some in a rush, some dragged by fear or grief. Imani held out her boarding pass. Paper. Crisp. The ink still fresh from the kiosk. She did not thrust it into the agent's hand. She simply presented it like a gift for a child. He did not take it. He cocked his head as if it were a trick. Lynn's voice filled the gap again, lazy and loud at once. Imani felt the easy violence of it, the assumption that sound could be a weapon and that the crowd would be the shield. Imani had gotten to the airport early. She had glided through the glass doors into the humming light of departure boards and coffee lines. She had chosen a seat near the window where planes taxied like slow blue whales. She had texted her sister a photo of the sky. Gate B12. On time. See you tonight. She had finished a bottle of water and checked her notes for the meeting she was flying to join. A short trip. Home by morning if all went well. When boarding time came, she stood and walked to the sign for priority. Not a flex. Not even a habit. Just where her ticket said she should be. The process felt like a quiet promise. You pay for space, you receive it. You carry weight, you earn some ease. She did not think to brace herself for impact. She should not have to. Your real ticket, Lynn said again, as if Imani were a child hiding a crayon. She gave a theatrical sigh that landed somewhere between pity and scorn. They try this all the time, she added, not to Imani but to the agent, like a stage whisper to a co-star. The agent's eyes flicked to Imani's face, then back to the computer. The pause lengthened. A line grew behind them like a low tide pulling people into a single, rising breath. A man in a ball cap exhaled an exaggerated huff. A woman further back adjusted her purse and found something fascinating on her phone screen, as if to say she was not involved, though her eyes did not look away. The airport's air conditioning droned, steady and indifferent. Somewhere a child laughed, then stopped, tugged quiet by a parent who had already read the moment and wanted none of it. Imani did not argue. She placed the boarding pass on the counter, so it lay flat and still. She opened her wallet and set her ID next to it, corners aligned like puzzle pieces. She asked, with a voice as steady as the moving walkway, for the agent to scan the code. She did not mention status or miles or the small metal tag on her bag that many travelers would treat like a medal. She did not present her life to the crowd for grading. The agent's mouth pressed into a line. He reached for a radio, then changed his mind and tapped his keyboard with 2 fingers. He was young, maybe new, and afraid of making a wrong decision that would haunt him later. He glanced at Lynn, whose face had arranged itself into a mixture of concern and superiority, the way faces do when people enjoy the idea of being vigilant more than the work of being fair. Imani noticed the name pins. She saw the pearly letters on the gate agent's chest, Evan, and the tiny scratches on the plastic from months of zippers and seatbelts and stress. She saw the faint smear of lipstick on Lynn's front tooth and the pale line of a wedding ring tan. Details. Always details. They were small anchors in a sea of noise. The first person behind Imani shifted her stance, stepping to the side, to peek around. She did it with that odd dance people do when they want to see and not be seen. Her eyes met Imani's for a breath and widened, then flicked down in apology. The apology was not for the shove. It was for the silence. Imani accepted it like a tiny coin of shared reality. Better than nothing. Not enough. The first announcement for boarding echoed with polite cheer, pre-boards, families with small children, those who need extra time. The overhead speakers made even soothing words sound like orders. Imani waited. The agent still did not scan. Lynn now stood half-turned, so she could perform for both the counter and the line. She spoke of rules. She spoke of fake tickets and how the world had become lax. She spoke as if authority had asked her to help. No one had. Imani's phone buzzed in her pocket. She did not look. She kept her hands visible and still, a choice she did not like but knew. She had learned that in certain spots, too much motion could be used against you. She had learned that defense could be twisted into threat if it came from a black woman's body, even when that body was quiet and rooted. The agent finally reached for the pass. He glanced at Imani's face as if daring it to flinch. The scanner beeped, soft and bright. It sounded like a small relief. He frowned as if the machine had made a mistake. He scanned again. Another beep. Lynn folded her arms. She told him the codes were easy to fake. She said it in a way that made him wonder if she knew. She did not. He told Imani he needed to see the card that matched the status on the pass. His voice had grown official and thin. It was not a request. It was a test. Imani reached into her wallet and drew out the card, not the shiny one, but the basic one, the one anyone could get with enough flights and time. She set it down next to the ID. 3 rectangles on blue fake wood. A brief still life of proof. The line behind grew restless. It breathed in impatience and breathed out careful looks that avoided words like race and bias. They used other words in their minds. Words like mix-up or confusion or mistake. Those words were easier to hold. Easier to set down later. Easier to dodge in case the cameras came out. A small click sounded nearby as someone started to record with their phone. It was discreet, but not invisible. It was the soft beginning of a louder truth. Imani did not turn toward the sound. She just stood, spine straight, jaw unclenched, palms open on the counter, as if she were grounding herself in the same way airplanes do before they lift. Security did not appear. Not yet. The agent, to his credit or fear, did not press the call button. He typed something and then paused again. He said he needed a supervisor to approve. He said it like he was reading it off a card. Lynn rolled her eyes and made a noise that sounded like disappointment and delight all at once. She shifted her weight, so the line had to bend around her. It made a small, forced river around a stone that refused to move. Imani spoke then very low to the agent. Not a plea, not a threat. A simple request to follow the process. Scan the pass. Verify the code. Do what the protocol says. In that moment, she let herself remember every time she had stood like this, small and large ways people had made her question if she was allowed to be exactly where her feet were. She did not let the memory own her. She let it sharpen her focus. The supervisor took a long time to arrive, long enough for the flight clock to flick from 9:05 to 9:12. Long enough for a new line to form at the coffee stand across from the gate, and for the smell of dark roast to drift over like a half-remembered song. Long enough for the crowd to decide who they were inside this story, the defenders The watchers, the ones who pretend to yawn as if boredom could be a shield. Imani did not move out of the line. She did not step aside to make it easier for people who had not earned her place. She did not give her space to buy peace. She stayed, anchored by the truth of the barcode and the quiet thrum of her own heart. She arranged her features into something that looked like serenity and felt like strength. When the supervisor finally walked up, lanyard swinging, expression preloaded with judgment, Lynn straightened with the confidence of someone who trusted the outcome would favor her. The agent began to explain in a tone that turned facts into suspicion. The supervisor looked at Imani the way some people look at locked doors, already annoyed at the key they will have to fetch. In that gaze, Imani felt the old ache, but she also felt something else, steady and clear. She was not here to argue her right to exist. She was here to fly to a meeting, and the rest would be handled. Not now, not loudly, but it would be handled. She tucked that thought under her tongue like a seed. She knew seeds needed pressure and time. She had both, and this moment, with its petty shoves and delayed scans, was just the soil. The supervisor arrived with the practiced stride of someone who believed they could fix any scene by appearing in it. Her badge swung at her chest like a small pendulum, catching light then shadow. She looked at Imani the way people look at locked doors, not because they cannot be opened, but because opening them feels like a chore. She listened to the gate agent for a few seconds, then turned the full weight of her attention onto the woman who had been shoved aside and still stood steady. The next minutes moved in even smaller cuts. Questions piled up, less like steps of a process and more like a test with moving answers. Proof of purchase. The last 4 digits of the card used. The name of the person who booked the ticket. Whether she was traveling alone. Whether she understood how the boarding zones worked. Whether she had been upgraded by mistake. None of the questions were shouted. That would have made it easier to name. Instead, they were delivered with a soft edge that made them seem reasonable. That soft edge was the knife. Imani set down each piece as asked. Boarding pass again. ID again. The frequent flyer card. The email confirmation on her phone. She did not let her hands shake. She did not let her voice hold the sharpness that pressed against her ribs. She breathed through the body's wish to run. She met eyes without begging and answered without story. There is a way some people learn to move in spaces that do not want them. She had learned it early and reinforced it often. Behind her, the lines swelled and thinned as people adjusted themselves around this unnatural pause. Some passengers whispered with a hunger that felt like gossip disguised as civic duty. Others lowered their faces, as if quiet would make them neutral. The woman who had pushed Imani, Lynn, stood close enough to be read by the cameras, shoulders squared, lips pinched into a performance of vigilance. She told the supervisor she felt unsafe. She said rules had to mean something. She used words like protect and order and honest. The air around her vibrated with a self-importance that had likely served her before. Phones rose, not all at once, but enough that the light from their screens added a cold layer to the moment. A teenager in a hoodie tilted his camera with the casual focus of someone who knew how to hold an audience. A nurse in scrubs propped her phone on her rollerboard handle
I don't care.
and
You are not
pretended
coming
to
in
check
here.
messages while recording. A man in a suit bent his elbow, just so, giving himself an angle on the counter without appearing to intrude. The slow choir of cameras altered the room. The story now had witnesses who could not later claim they had misremembered. The supervisor decided that a call to security would bring clarity. She lifted her radio and spoke in a neutral tone that carried. The words did not accuse, not on the surface. But the subtext was simple: a problem was at the gate, and the problem had a face. Imani watched the supervisor's mouth move and felt the old weariness climb her spine one rung at a time. Authority often summoned more authority in these moments, not to ensure fairness, but to confirm a feeling. While they waited, the questions continued. The supervisor asked if Imani carried the physical credit card that had paid for the ticket. She did not, because the ticket had been purchased through a corporate account and mobile wallet. The supervisor frowned as if she had reached the end of patience. She asked who Imani worked for and why her trip was so important. The words were dressed as logistics. Their function was gatekeeping. The gate agent stared at the screen as if a single secret code would appear to make this whole scene righteous. Lynn leaned in again, not touching this time, but invading with temperature, with breath. She made sure the supervisor knew she had clocked many flights as a loyal customer and never seen such abuse of the system. She said it as if living in airports gave her the right to police other bodies. She stood inside the personal space of a woman she had shoved and found comfort there, as if the crowd's patience was a shield for her boldness. Imani refused to tuck herself out of a line. She kept her place without flinching. She answered when required and kept silence when it would have fed someone else's fire. In her pocket, her phone buzzed twice. A sister checking in. A colleague asking if she had boarded. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat and pictured the meeting room in another city where a whiteboard waited for a diagram she had drawn a dozen times. She pictured the work she had to do. She pictured the people who would be affected if she missed it. She opened her eyes and returned to the room she was in. The carpet, the hum of vents, the smell of coffee and stress. Security arrived with boots and belts and the kind of polite caution that pretends to be neutral. They glanced at Imani's face and then at the supervisor reading the stage direction. The supervisor explained it as a verification issue. She spared the push in the comments about where people belong. She left out tone. She left out the way the questions had been shaped. She framed it as due diligence. One of the officers nodded with a face that said these things happen. Another officer softened his voice as he asked Imani to step to the side so others could board. He called it procedure. He stood in a way that blocked the path while making it look like he was offering a choice. The crowd's whispers thickened. A woman in a denim jacket spoke under her breath to the person next to her, saying this could all be simple if the passenger would just cooperate. She did not see that cooperation was already in a room, standing in good shoes, with hands steady on the counter. A man with a travel pillow around his neck shook his head and used words like drama and delay as if they were the only pieces on the board. The young gate agent, Evan, looked tired in a way that suggested this job had taught him to expect conflict and to fear choosing wrong. He kept glancing toward the jet bridge, where a flight attendant stood like a question mark, resisting the urge to step into a mess that would not reward her. The screen flickered the new time, a pushback of 10 minutes. Anxiety spread through the line like static. When Imani was asked again to step aside, she did something quiet that did not look like resistance to most eyes. She asked for the policy in writing. She asked for the name of the document that governed what was happening. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand anything impossible. She requested clarity. The supervisor's mouth thinned further because clarity disrupts habits. The supervisor said this was common sense. Imani kept her place and her breath. The security officer shifted his stance. He had kind eyes that did not have power. He seemed to understand what was happening and also understand that his uniform was a tool someone was using to feel right. He suggested to the supervisor they simply scan the pass and, if needed, verify with the back office. The supervisor said they had already done that. The beep had been inconvenient. She preferred to doubt the machine over the woman. Imani's shoulders remained square, but the ache in her chest grew into a hot stone. She was not surprised by any of this. That was the cruel thing. Surprise had left the building years ago. Every step in this dance felt like muscle memory. Still, there is a cost. Having to be perfect drains a person, drop by drop, until even standing feels like a test. She refused to give the moment the satisfaction of seeing her shake. Across the aisle, the teenager in the hoodie tapped quickly. The caption on his video fed the fire. People online liked neat stories with villains and heroes. The real thing was Messier. It involved policy written by hands that would never see their own faces in a scene like this. It involved training absorbed from culture, not manuals. It involved a woman who truly believed she was keeping order and who would never admit the thrill that came from making someone else small. The supervisor raised an eyebrow and asked to see a second form of identification. The list kept expanding. Passport, work badge, anything to reach a point where the request could not be met so the denial could feel earned. Imani pulled out a travel wallet. She placed another card on the counter. Her name was the same on all of them. The face in the picture was hers, always her. Her hands did not fumble. Lynn laughed now, a small, brittle sound. She muttered something about handouts and scams, but quiet enough to keep plausible denial. She turned a fraction and showed her best profile to the nearest phone. She adjusted her scarf. She was building a version of herself that she would like to see later if the video found her. She did not know that video is unkind to performances built on hurt. In the crush of it, a gentler act unfolded. The nurse from earlier met Imani's eyes and gave a small nod, the kind that says, "I see you." She stepped forward without being invited and told the security officer she had been watching. She did not argue, just stated that the only person who had pushed was not the person now being held up. The officer's jaw worked. He said he could not adjudicate behavior without a formal complaint. The nurse said she would file one. The words hung, then fell. The boarding clock ticked again. More passengers were sent down the jet bridge. The split of the line was not neat. Some people were waved past Imani with a quick smile and no questions. Others were stopped and then allowed. The randomness of it had a pattern only if you looked hard, and most did not. Most were trying to get where they were going, not to face what was in front of them. By the time a second supervisor arrived, this one with a darker suit and a tighter expression, the room had chosen sides without saying so. The new supervisor spoke, in fewer words, measuring them like coins. He glanced from the phone screens to the gate's camera, and then to the woman at the center who had not moved from a spot where she belonged. He said he would call the station manager. He said it like a gift. It sounded like a threat. Imani eased her shoulders back without making it obvious. She felt the pressure of 100 eyes and the quiet support of a few. The heat from the lights, the hum from the vents, the tap of keys, the small coughs, the shuffle of bags, every sound layered until it became one long chord. She held her ground inside it. She thought of the message she would send later, the log she would make of names and times, the way she would lay this out not as a flame, but as a case. She thought of the steady way truth moves when you give it form and raise it gently, without the spikes of rage others want to point to. She thought of how many times this had happened to people who did not have the energy or the platform to push back. The thought made her throat tighten. It also made her resolve turn to steel. The second supervisor walked away to make the call. Security stayed in place, a polite wall. The first supervisor crossed her arms. The gate agent stared at the screen as if it could save him. Lynn checked her lipstick in the black glass of her phone. The teenager's live stream ticked upward with tiny hearts and sharp words. The flight clock hit another delay. In a corner of her mind, Imani could already hear the tone of the next act forming. Not the loud act. Not yet. For now, there was the patience of a fuse lit with care. For now, there was the posture of a person who knew that the most powerful answer to being pushed aside is to stay exactly where you are and make the world admit it. The crowd thickened the way mist gathers on glass, slow at first, then all at once. A circle that had been loose and shy drew close enough for breaths to overlap. Strangers took positions without talking about it. The ones who wanted to help drifted forward, the ones who wanted to watch slid sideways to the best angles, the ones who wanted it to go away fixed their eyes on a distant gate and pretended not to hear. Screens lifted in small, practice motions. Palms tilted. Lenses found the center and locked. The teenager in the hoodie steadied his phone with two hands and made his face a blank slate, so the moment could write on it. The nurse in scrubs tapped her screen, then kept her expression neutral, letting the image speak. A man with gray at his temples and a silk tie angled his camera behind his coffee cup like a mirror trick. Some people filmed wide to catch everyone. Some zoomed tight, framing only the woman at the counter who would not move an inch. Imani felt the attention land. It had weight and temperature. It prickled at the crown of her head and slid down her back like rain under a collar. She refused to carry it as shame. She lifted her chin a fraction. Not so high that it looked like defiance, just enough to keep dignity from slipping. She let her hands rest flat on the counter again, a small prayer of steadiness. The first videos went live. It happened the way sparks leap, without asking permission. A comment here, a share there. The teenager's stream pulled in hearts and question marks, tiny icons moving like fish in clear water. Someone added a caption that tried to fit this mess into a line of text, because that is how stories travel now. The words were not perfect, but they were close. People watching from airport lounges and bus stops and office chairs started to type back, to send little storms toward Gate B12. The sound in the area changed. It thickened under the surface. Not louder, not softer, denser. Conversations slowed at the edges as more attention leaned hard toward the center. Even the loudspeaker seemed to take a breath before each announcement, as if it, too, felt the room tip toward a single woman and the people who had mistaken her stillness for permission to doubt her. A little girl with glitter shoes tugged at her mother's sleeve and stared openly. The mother made a hush motion and then, with guilt, handed the girl a snack because she could not shield her from the moment and did not know what else to offer. A middle-aged man with a travel pillow around his neck shook his head, then caught himself and smoothed his face blank. A college student in a school hoodie whispered to her friend and glanced at Imani with eyes that held anger and awe at once. A line had been drawn in silence, and people crossed it with the smallest of acts. A woman with salt and pepper twists stepped nearer and took out a notebook. She wrote down badge names and times as if she were mapping a storm. A tall man with a veteran's cap removed his glasses and cleaned them, then stepped closer to the counter and planted his feet, as if to say, without words, that he would stay as long as it took. A flight attendant off duty and carrying a tote hovered near the jet bridge and looked from the supervisors to the cameras and back again. Her posture said she had seen this before and hated each rerun. The circle of authority, meanwhile, did not change shape. Security remained planted, a polite wall with visible tools and hidden hesitations. The first supervisor crossed her arms and leaned on policy, the way people lean on furniture when they are tired but do not want to sit. The second supervisor checked the gate camera with a quick glance that did not catch details. The gate agent kept his eyes on the screen, a young face set to neutral in case it needed to swing to either side. Lynn, the woman who had pushed Imani, adjusted her scarf and loosened then tightened her jaw. She watched the phones and made small movements as if trying out versions of herself. Concerned traveler, loyal customer, protector of norms. Each pose was a costume change that did not fool the light. She stepped just close enough to be included in frames, then retreated half a step when comments of disapproval crackled from somewhere behind. A murmur rose when the delay clock flipped again. People hate wasting time more than most things. It makes them choose who to blame. Some aimed their blame at the woman who stood her ground. Others aimed it at the supervisors who could not bring themselves to tap a scanner and let a machine cut through noise. The split felt like a thin crack running through the room. It glittered underfoot. Everyone felt it. Some pretended they did not. And then a small courage entered, not with a speech, but with presence. The nurse in scrubs stepped forward. She did not wave her phone. She folded it in her palm and made eye contact with the second supervisor. It was an ask without words. See what is happening. The supervisor's gaze slid away. The nurse remained. That staying became a beacon. A few others drifted closer, as if drawn by gravity they had been denying. A man with a backpack and paint-stained jeans cleared his throat and took off his hat, a gesture of respect in the wrong setting and still correct. He pressed his lips together and looked at Imani with something like apology that wasn't for a thing he had done, but for a world he understood too well. An older woman with pearls and a book under her arm nodded once, sharp and sure, like someone who had chaired meetings and fought wars no one filmed. On the feeds, angles multiplied. Words people might not say out loud appeared there in text form, brave from behind glass. Some typed stories of their own delays, their own humiliations, their own sudden checks in quiet lines. Some typed out, cloaked as reason. We don't know everything. Maybe it's a mix-up. Everyone's touchy these days. But the images kept looping: Imani's calm, the hover of security, the supervisor's stillness. A loop can wear through denial like water on stone. Imani allowed herself to feel the ground under the thin carpet. Concrete, unyielding. She imagined roots, not to get lost in poetry, but to steady her body. She thought of her grandmother's stories, of standing on porches and church steps when a line of eyes tried to push you back, with a look. Stand where your feet are. That was the teaching. Your place is not a favor. It is a fact. A pilot in uniform passed by, late to his own schedule, and slowed for a heartbeat. His face flickered through concern and calculation. He gave a small nod that was more apology than promise. He kept walking because the system pulls even decent people forward. A whisper floated from somewhere behind. Why doesn't she just step aside and let them figure it out? It held the easy logic of people who have never had to pay the price for stepping aside. Another whisper answered it, quieter but firmer, because stepping aside is how it stays the same. The words did not rise to the surface, but they settled into the scene like tiny weights on a cloth that threatened to fly. The second supervisor returned from his call with a practice calm that looked like control. He did not announce a decision. He began to talk in low tones to the first supervisor and the gate agent, sharing a story about risk and verification that sounded responsible if you didn't know what you were looking at. He positioned his body, so he faced the room with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. The nurse shifted from one foot to the other and did not leave. The veteran folded his arms and fixed his gaze. The teenager lowered his phone, just enough to look at Imani without a screen between them. Something in his face changed. Whatever this was for him before, content, a moment, a chance to go viral, had become something else. A lesson, maybe? A vow. A woman with a company badge clipped to her tote, someone from a different airline, here, on her own trip, stepped near Imani's shoulder and stood without words. She didn't claim to speak for a brand. She gave a kind of human cover, the way you stand next to a person in the rain before you find the umbrella. Across the gate area, a cluster of men in branded polo shirts exchanged looks that said, with no need for language, that this might become a PR fire. One of them reached for a desk phone and began to dial with the speed of someone whose job was to put out small fires before they made the evening news. Another scrolled a company chat. The tone of their attention, at least, had shifted from annoyance to alert. Imani felt a soft tremor under the surface, a tremor of change, not triumph. Power still leaned against her. The officers were still a wall. The scanners still sat silent. The supervisors still controlled the room's official script. But the unofficial record had been seized by the crowd. Witness had entered the scene and refused to leave, and that changes outcomes more than it first appears. This shift did not give her ease. She knew how quickly witness can turn into spectacle, how easily a person can be reduced to a symbol that strangers toss between them. She protected her center. She kept her breath even. She let silence do work her voice didn't need to do. When she did speak, it was only to answer the question put directly to her, and she did it the way a candle gives light, steady, focused, not by burning the room down. A delay notice flashed again. Groans rose and fell like a tide. People who would miss connections began to send urgent texts and pace in tight loops. Anger reached for the easiest target, then stalled when it met the cameras. Public anger scares itself when it sees its own reflection. In the middle of that churn, a small boy slipped his hand into Imani's. A child's instinct to comfort the person in the room has made a center. His mother gasped and reached for him, but Imani only squeezed lightly, then let go with a smile that meant no harm done. That touch, brief and honest, softened the air more than any speech would have. More staff arrived at the edge of the scene, drawn by the math of attention. The station manager had been summoned. Everyone could feel it. The supervisors stood a little taller, nerves pulled tight around them like strings. Security adjusted their stance. Enough to say they were ready to be seen doing the right thing, whichever way the wind blew next. The crowd, by now, had taken ownership of the truth. They had seen the push. They had seen the questions multiply beyond reason. They had seen calm met by suspicion and courtesy met by stall tactics. They had seen what happens to a person who refuses to shrink. They were ready, some of them, to say it out loud. Others were ready simply to not look away. And Imani, steady at the counter with the documents she had offered again and again, felt the moment gather itself like a breath before a note. She did not change her posture. She did not rehearse a speech. She held the ground under her shoes and waited for the next face of power to enter. The phones kept their silent vigil. The light above the gate hummed. Somewhere close, a door opened. The room shifted half an inch, as if the building itself leaned in to watch what would happen when authority met witness and had to choose a side. The station manager arrived with the urgency of a person who felt a room change before stepping into it. He scanned the faces, found the phones, measured the distance between authority and witness. His lanyard swayed. His smile was fixed but thin, the kind of smile built for small fires, not for what waited at gate B12. He moved through the supervisors and took the space beside the counter. He spoke in soft tones that sounded careful, but the words were just air. He mentioned policy. He nodded at security. He tried to lower the temperature without touching the heat source. Imani did not move. She looked at him with the same steady focus she had given everyone else, and the room felt the tiny shift as a new layer of power slid into place. He suggested a private conversation. It was polite. It was also a way to move the scene out of view. Imani shook her head once, not rude, not stubborn, only sure. The beginning had been public. The end would be, too. The cameras caught nothing more than that small refusal, but it was enough. A dozen people in the circle grew taller by a breath. They understood. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform. She reached into her bag and took out a slim matte black card. No gold trim, no shine. Just weight and name. She set it on the counter, edge aligned with the laminate. The manager glanced down for a second that stretched. His pupils tightened, then widened. The card carried a simple line, Imani Brooks, Managing Director, Meridian Transit Group. Under it, in small type, 3 words that caused new calculations behind his eyes: airports, rail, logistics. The nurse in scrubs could not read the card from where she stood, but she felt the energy curve. The veteran adjusted his stance. The teenager's camera tried to zoom without shaking. The card was lifted, turned once, placed down again with more care than before. The manager's voice softened. He asked again if they might step aside. Imani met his request with a quiet look that said not here, not this time. Behind the counter, the young agent's breathing changed. He did not know exactly who Meridian was, but he knew the way his manager held the card meant something. The first supervisor's arms came uncrossed. The second supervisor leaned closer to read the small print, and then leaned back as if he had swallowed something sharp. They understood enough to be afraid of the wrong choice. Imani kept her hands in view, palms open on the edge of the counter, a posture that had become muscle memory. She asked in that same calm voice for the pass to be scanned. She did not push the name on the card across the line as a weapon. It was not a threat. It was a fact set down among other facts: time, place, documentation, dignity. Her phone vibrated once on the counter. A message slid onto the screen. 3 words and a name the manager could not ignore even if he tried. Saw the stream. Call. The sender's name was plain: Chair Ortiz. No title. None was needed for those who lived in this world. The manager read it, because everyone reads what is left visible when tension is this high. He straightened his tie and made a small decision: less performance, more care. A man in a suit standing 2 rows back tilted his head and squinted at the card. Recognition fired. He stepped away from his place in line and pulled his phone out with a new purpose. His movement was not part of the crowd's rhythm, it was its own. He spoke in low tones, urgent and precise. He used words like Meridian Holdings contract renewal, and he used them like keys, not gossip. He had put 2 stories together and realized he was standing inside one of them. The station manager pressed his radio and asked for a line to corporate he would have never requested 10 minutes earlier. His voice stayed even. The room could not hear the answer, but they could hear the speed of it. Someone important had picked up. Imani slid a second item from her bag, not flashy, almost humble, a white envelope with a printed letterhead. She did not open it. She placed it next to the card, a breadcrumb that led to a larger path. The letterhead matched the name on the card. Under it, a date and a subject line that said site visit, be concourse service audit. She did not announce its meaning. She let the paper exist where anyone with eyes could see it. Lynn, who had stood with her chin lifted and her story polished, lost a degree of height. The narrative she had been crafting for the nearest camera no longer fit her face. She shifted her bag as if to leave, then stopped. Leaving would admit something she could not admit, even to herself. She put on a face of confusion, then one of hurt. Neither held. The manager slid closer to the keyboard and typed, not in the slow way of someone buying time, but in the fast way of someone catching up to a truth. He finally scanned the paper in Imani's hand. The machine did what it does. It beeped. Clean. Clear. He did it again for good measure, the way unbelief tests a miracle. Beep. The sound was so simple it felt like it could break a heart. Security took a small step back, without being told. It was not surrender. It was respect, or at least caution. The officers rested their hands in more human positions. The crowd felt those inches and breathed out as one. Imani used her phone then, not to record, but to call. The voice on the other end did not need her name. She spoke in the brief language of people who have done this too many times. She noted the gate, the flight number, the sequence of events. She did not salt her report with anger. She did not omit the push. She mentioned the call to security and the delays, the remarks about protecting a cabin. She said she would send a written summary and names. She listened. She nodded once and ended the call. She placed the phone down, face up. The teenager's feed caught a new detail. A tiny banner at the top of Imani's phone that read Meridian Ops Central. Comments poured into his stream with facts someone looked up in seconds. Meridian, the chat said, held long-term concessions at multiple terminals. Meridian handled ground services at several hubs. Meridian's last annual report spoke of equity and training and contracts measured in years, not days. The room did not hear these words, but some people did, and they reacted by turning their bodies to face Imani with the respect they had withheld. A flight attendant appeared at the mouth of the jet bridge, a quiet compass in navy. She recognized the name on the card. She had been in briefings where slides showed logos and leaders. Her eyebrows lifted a fraction. She spoke softly to the station manager, and though her words could not be heard, her tone carried a truth. This is not just a customer. This is the person you wish had not seen this. The station manager tried again to redirect. He talked of making everyone comfortable. He tried to offer a lounge, a bottle of water, a whisper of apology tucked into general phrases. Imani's answer was a small smile that did not take the bait. Comfort could wait. Accountability could not. She opened her notes app and began to type. Names times words. She did not hide her screen. She did not flaunt it either. It was work. The supervisors watched her thumbs move and felt a thread tighten. The act of documentation had always carried power, but in this moment it became a quiet act of leadership. She was not waiting for rescue. She was building a record, even as the story unfolded. The man in the suit returned to his spot with a new stillness. He had made his call. He had said the name he needed to say. He had been heard. He stayed now to watch what would happen when calls climbed ladders faster than people could climb stairs. A new message blinked on Imani's screen, this one from a contact labeled simply a meta. The manager saw it, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face at seeing his own name on her phone, saved in a way that suggested this was not their first overlap. The message was brief. He did not know what it said. He did not need to. He glanced at the ceiling as if the building had ears. The nurse in scrubs stepped half a pace closer to Imani, a subtle act of solidarity. The veteran shifted to create a small buffer with his body. The denim jacket woman placed her water bottle on the counter near Imani's elbow, not because she needed a drink, but as a small sign. I am here. The second supervisor, who had leaned so hard on the idea of policy, found his script running out of pages. He fumbled for phrases that used the control rooms. He spoke the word verification again, but the room did not accept it the way it had before. Words crack when truth arrives. The station manager took another call. He turned his body away and lowered his voice, then remembered the circle and turned back. He adjusted his plan in real time. He clicked keys. He removed a flag he had placed on the record minutes earlier. He told the agent to print a fresh pass. The agent obeyed as if relieved to be told to do the job he had wanted to do all along. Imani did not reach for the new pass. She waited. The manager met her eyes and understood. This was not about paper. It was about naming what had happened out loud. He swallowed. He did not deliver a speech. He did not apologize in the way a camera would love. He said a few simple words, and the room heard them for what they were. The first small stones of a bridge that would need to be built. Lynn tried one last pivot to concern, to confusion, to the idea that she had been trying to help. The light did not follow her. The crowd withheld its attention, which can be the sharpest kind of judgment. She looked smaller now, not because someone had cut her down, but because the moment had lost the air that had held her up. Imani placed the black card back into her wallet, the letter into her bag. She kept the new boarding pass on the counter. She looked once around the circle, not to bask in it, but to mark who had stood and who had shrunk. She did not need a list of names to remember. Her mind was a careful ledger when it had to be. The shift was not a cheer. It was a tilt. The weight moved in the room, away from the easy narrative that had held for too long and toward the quiet fact of a woman who did not bend. Power had not changed hands yet, but it had noticed her. It had spoken to her in a different tone. It had placed a new respect on the counter beside the paper and the phone. She did not step forward. Not yet. She allowed the moment to settle, to be seen, to be recorded. She let the station manager stand in the pause and feel what it meant to share a room with the truth. Then she lifted her hand, not in victory but in rest, and waited for the next door to open. The reveal did not arrive with fanfare. It unfolded like a sunrise, slow and certain, turning edges bright until everyone could see. The station manager held the black card as if it could burn him. The room felt the change before anyone named it. The air itself seemed to lean toward Imani, as if gravity had found a new center. She made one small request that was not really a request. She asked the manager to reconnect the call he had just taken and place it on speaker. She said it quietly, the way a person says, "Please pass the salt," at a table they own. He hesitated for a breath, glanced at the ring of phones, then did it. His fingers shook as he tapped the key. The voice that came through the speaker was calm and clipped, not loud, not theatrics. It used Imani's name with an ease that said this was not the first time. It asked for a summary. The manager's tone changed as he gave it. Facts now, no spin. He described the push, the doubts, the calls, the stall. He said the pass had beeped twice. He did not say why he had ignored the sound. The voice on the line gave a short set of steps in plain order, each one a clean door opening. Release the passenger. Deactivate the staff, who had escalated. Hold boarding across nearby gates for a service check. Call the district director and legal. Move guests already boarded off the jet bridge if needed. Record badge numbers. Preserve footage. The words were not angry. They were firm. They traveled like current through copper. Only then did the manager say the name for the room to hear, a name many did not know but felt in the shift that followed. Chair Ortiz of the airport authority. The circle exhaled. The phones tilted, hungry and ready. The officers looked at each other and straightened their cuffs. The first supervisor's skin went pale under the airport lights. The second reached for his tie as if it could keep him afloat. The crowd did not know the whole map, but they understood enough. Imani had not brought a friend to scold a manager. She had brought the person who signs leases and renews contracts, who holds keys few people ever see. It landed in the room like a gentle hammer. Not crush. Shape. Imani did not bask. She stayed still. She let the call carry what it needed to carry. She kept her hands on the counter as if to hold the moment steady for everyone. This was not vengeance. It was correction, performed in daylight at normal speed with a kind of grace that made it hard to look away. The station monitors flickered. A thin banner slid across the bottom of 3 screens along the concourse. Service pause, gate support audit in progress. It was a simple line, but it reached far. Boarding calls at nearby gates stopped mid-sentence. Agents put down scanners and reached for headsets. A hush moved through the space like wind over tall grass. 100 journeys paused, not because of a storm outside, but because of a test inside. Security shifted another step back. They were not retreating. They were clearing space for what needed to happen. The nurse in scrubs closed her eyes for a heartbeat and opened them with a sheen that was not only relief. It was witness satisfied. The veteran at her side nodded once, a salute, so small it was private. Lynn's face went through 3 changes in a single breath. Surprise, then protest, then something smaller that she could not name. She touched her scarf, as if a new knot could change the story already on a dozen screens. She began to talk to a nearby phone, hands open, face tilted toward harm turned into hurt. The lens did not love her this time. It moved away and found Imani's stillness instead. The teenager's stream caught the moment the lights over the jet bridge dimmed for a pause, and the gate agent, young, thin, tired, took a breath that sounded like a person surfacing. He glanced at Imani with a look that mixed fear and thanks. He had wanted to do the right thing. He had not been allowed. He felt the room shift and felt permission settle on his shoulders like a cloak. Imani's phone lit again. A new message pulsed, soft and white. Meridian Ops, stand down confirmed. She had not said a word about her role beyond the card, and yet the pieces spoke for her. Meridian Transit Group was not just a vendor. It was the company that ran the gears no one saw, the baggage belts under the floor, the jet bridge checks, the staffing at the gates, the fuel contracts, the cleaning crews, the invisible hands that make air travel appear seamless when it works. And Imani was not a visitor. She was the person who set the standards, signed the training checks, wrote the clauses about bias and care, and followed through when those clauses were ignored. A simple truth walked into the center of the room and stood down every excuse. She did not need the seat to prove she belonged. The building itself did. The district director arrived, breath high in his chest, trying to look composed. He scanned the faces and landed on Imani like a needle finding north. He greeted her with the careful respect of someone who both answered to her firm and needed her goodwill. The crowd saw the nod and understood more. This was not a lucky connection. This was structure. He asked for a side room. She did not move. The circle would remain. He adjusted in place, opened a small folder, and began to follow a checklist. The checklist had words that mattered in this order: relief of duty, incident report, guest care, compliance review, immediate training hold. He spoke those words where all could hear. Saying them in public turned them from jargon into a promise. 2 staff members were escorted away without handcuffs, without raised voices, without theater. One took off her lanyard with stiff hands and placed it on the counter, the way a person sets down a tool they no longer get to use. The crowd did not cheer. They watched. They understood that the removal was not the end. It was the first consequence, not the last. Across the concourse, other managers received the same pause notice on their screens. They gathered their teams for a quick stand-up in huddles by their gates, the way crews do after near miss. Words like respect, verify, de-escalate, and dignity rose and fell in those circles. Some said them with conviction. Some said them as if tasting them for the first time, but they said them. Imani accepted the fresh boarding pass at last. She did not bookend the moment with triumph. She looked at the name on it. Her name, a simple confirmation of facts that had always been true. She asked the agent to note on her record that she would be filing a formal complaint. She did not whisper. She did not glare. She made a record while the room could still feel its own shift. Phones kept watching, but their tone changed. The captions moved from outrage to awe, from "why is this happening" to "look what is being done." A news site picked up the live stream and added a line that did not exaggerate. Executive halts gate ops to address discrimination. The phrase halts gate ops traveled far because it was clean and active and true. Avery's story lived in another terminal that day. This was Imani's. She had not shouted. She had not humiliated. She had allowed a system to reveal itself and then required it to repair itself in front of the people it serves. That is a type of power often mocked because it does not entertain. It does not need to. The manager cleared his throat and for the first time since he arrived, looked Imani in the eyes straight on. He thanked her for her patience in words that sounded small next to the harm, but they were a start. He said the pause would hold until the director released it. He said the staff involved had been removed from duty. He said a review would begin the same day. He promised follow-up. Promises are cheap. The crowd waited to see if this one would be spent. Imani nodded. She slid the letter back into her bag and tucked the card into her wallet. She sent one message to Meridian Ops with the names she had logged and a short line that would move men and women into motion across the building. Commence Level 1 audit. Be concourse customer interaction focus with equity lens. Simple words, heavy wheels. The nurse stepped forward then, not to congratulate, but to hand Imani the notes she had taken. Names, times, quotes, the push of the start. Imani accepted them with a grateful blink that made the nurse look away, because too much grace can make a person shy. The veteran dipped his chin. The teenager stopped his live and opened the camera again, not to film, but to take one still photo. Imani's hand on the counter, the new boarding pass, the small black card, 3 small facts that told the whole story without a face. Lynn made a move toward the jet bridge, then stopped when a supervisor with new humility raised a hand and asked her to wait for a statement. She looked around for someone who would adore her version. No one did. Silence met her like a mirror she did not want. She folded into a seat and stared at her hands. For the first time, she seemed to feel the room not as a stage, but as a place full of people she had hurt. That feeling may, or may not have held. It existed. That mattered. The pause held until the district director lifted it. It did not take hours. It did not need to. A stand-up ran, a report opened, a team moved. Boarding resumed in waves, with agents walking as if on new floors, careful where they placed their steps. The plane at B-12 would leave later than planned. So would 3 others. Small costs for a larger fix. Imani moved toward the jet bridge only when the nurse and the veteran stepped back to clear the path as if they were presenting her to a room that had learned something. She did not bow. She did not wave. She walked like a person on her way to work, which is what she was. As she crossed the threshold, the ring of watchers lowered their phones at last. They had wanted a twist, something sharp. What they received was better. They watched a woman reveal that the door that hit her was attached to a building she could repair. They watched a system stop because one person insisted on light. They watched what quiet power looks like when it is not a slogan but a set of actions carried out with care. They would talk about it for days. They would tell it different ways. The cameras would remember the pause. The workers would remember the stand down. The managers would remember the calls. And Imani would remember, as always, that the work does not end with a beep. It begins there. Consequences began in the small, quiet ways that matter most. The first supervisor removed her lanyard with shaking fingers and placed it on the counter. The second stayed very still while the district director read off policy numbers in a calm voice that did not seek to humiliate, only to mark the line they had crossed. Evan, the young agent, blinked fast and swallowed hard, relief and dread moving across his face like shadows. Security softened their stance and stepped back into the crowd. The nurse closed her notes and tucked them into her pocket, as if to say the witnessing was done and the record would now take its turn. When Imani walked down the jet bridge, she did not look back. Public moments can turn to theater if you feed them too long. She chose flight seat sky. The cabin had its own hush. Strangers made room with their knees, shifted bags, kept their eyes polite. A flight attendant set a small glass of water on Imani's tray, without a word. The door closed. The engines grew from hum to thunder. The plane lifted. Only then did she allow her body to shake, a small tremor running from palms to shoulders, the tax paid for holding steady so long. She set her hand flat on her knee until the tremor passed. She watched the wing tilt and catch light. Above the clouds, the sun wore the same face it wears for everyone. That truth steadied her in a way nothing else could. Her phone filled with messages. Some were from friends who had seen the stream and sent fire and hearts and words like proud and furious and here. Some were from staff at Meridian. Ops had already scheduled the audit. Legal had drafted notices of hold. HR had prepared communication for ground teams across the city. A terse line from Chair Ortiz promised follow-up and thanked her for staying public when silence would have been easier. A note from a civil rights partner arrived with 2 offers: counsel for anyone who had been harmed, and training modules updated for immediate use. Imani drafted one message from the plane. She wrote it to the airline's CEO and copied the district director and the station manager. No adjectives, no theatrics. She laid out the sequence, named names and times, noted procedures ignored, flagged the call to security, and listed the statements about protection and verification. She ended with the measures she expected to see: immediate relief of duty for those involved, preservation of footage, a third-party review, and a commitment to publish outcomes. She added one line for Evan, the gate agent who had wanted to do the right thing and had not been allowed. It asked for coaching and support instead of blame. The plane landed late, but calm. In the car to her hotel, the city slid by in pieces of glass and brick. News had moved faster than traffic. A local station ran the clip with a banner that said service pause after gate bias. A national blog followed, then a transportation trade site. Commentators argued about policy and training and culture. Some spoke from pain, some from habit, some to fill air. The video did not need their words. It held its own. By nightfall, the airline's public account posted a statement. It was careful and clean. It used words like respect and values and apology. It promised a full review and named the station for the first time. It said the staff involved had been suspended pending the investigation. It said they were grateful to the customer who had brought the issue to their attention and committed to learning. The statement did not name Imani. It did not have to. People had already filled that blank. A separate email left the CEO's desk for Imani alone. It did not sound like a press release. It carried the weight of someone who felt a thing and could not yet fix it. It invited her to meet the next morning with the airline's legal, HR, and operations chiefs. It asked for patience and offered a seat at the table where changes are written, not discussed. She replied that she would come and that she would bring names and notes. She added 2 more requests: a public town hall for frontline staff and a fund for passengers who experience discrimination to receive immediate care, not coupons. She clicked send and closed her eyes for 5 minutes in the dark of the car. Lynn's part of the story burst open on its own timetable. The internet found her quickly, the way the internet does. A photo from a work event surfaced, a LinkedIn profile, a company page for a boutique realty firm. Her employer posted a statement late in the day saying they were aware of a video involving one of their agents, that the conduct did not reflect their values, and that the person had been placed on leave pending review. Comments roared. Some called for her job. Some called for mercy. Imani read none of it. She does not feed fires she did not light. The union representing gate staff sent a note to Meridian and to the airline requesting fairness for their members, protection from doxing, and due process. They condemned bias and asked to be part of the solution. Imani read that note twice and circled the line that mattered most: training designed with workers, not at them. She wrote back the same night. She asked for a meeting with union stewards at the airport to hear what pressures and gaps led to moments like B12. She meant it. Morning brought a conference room with glass walls, a long table, a carafe of coffee, and faces that had slept less than they wanted. The CEO sat at the head. Legal, HR, ops, and the district director lined one side. On the other sat Imani, a Meridian counsel, and an advocate from a civil rights organization she trusted. No cameras, no scripting, She opened her folio and placed her notes on the table, each page a piece of the story laid flat, where no one could deny it. She did not ask for heads. She asked for systems. She asked where discretion becomes bias. She asked how verification became a shield for doubt and a blade for humiliation. She asked what training existed and how often it was refreshed, how it was tested, how it was measured. She asked who watched the watchers. She asked how culture was spoken about in hiring and promotion. She asked what happens to a complaint after the apology email is sent and the press cycle moves on. Ops answered with charts and maps and words like throughput and gate pressure and staffing ratios. HR answered with policies and modules and completion rates. Legal answered with risk language and case law. The CEO listened, then asked them all the only question that mattered. Did it work yesterday at B12? Silence is a kind of confession. It held the room for a full 6 seconds. Imani slid a simple framework across the table. It was not fancy. It had 4 lines: prevention, escalation, intervention, repair. She wrote next to each line the step that had failed on their watch. She did not raise her voice. She did not let anyone look away. She placed the union note beside it and the nurses' handwritten names next to that. She asked that the nurse and the veteran be thanked and supported if they were harassed online. The CEO nodded and wrote the names down himself. They agreed on actions before they stood. Not a list for show, but steps with owners and dates and checks. The airline would place the supervisors on unpaid leave while the investigation ran. Evan would be reassigned with a mentor and added support, his record noting his attempt to follow process. Security would retrain on when presence comms and when it inflames. Gate cameras would be flagged for preservation and review by a neutral party. A rapid response equity team would be created to arrive at scenes like B12 before harm and rumor outtrend truth. Meridian would fund and co-design that team, and the airport authority would formalize it in the service agreements that govern the building. Imani asked for one more piece, a passenger ombuds program with real authority to intervene and a number printed on every boarding pass. Not a call center, a person with a badge and power to pause a gate. The CEO said yes. Ops swallowed and said they would make it work. Legal asked for 1 day to frame it. Imani said it should be in place within 2 weeks, even if it launched as a pilot at only 4 gates. The district director committed with a nod that looked like a vow. Outside that room, the world kept doing what it does. The stock ticked down a 1/4 point and then recovered. The video crossed 1 million views. A columnist wrote about quiet power. A morning show used the word grace. None of that changed what was on the paper in front of Imani. She collected the signed commitments and slid them into her folio. She asked for copies of the incident report once completed. She asked for anonymized data on complaints by race and outcome for the past 2 years. She asked for the staff schedule that put the first supervisor in charge of 2 gates. She did not forget the details that make a fix stick. By afternoon, the first consequences landed softly and then hard. HR notified the supervisors that their badges were deactivated. IT switched off logins while preserving records. The district office scheduled listening sessions for staff who were afraid to speak on camera but wished to speak in rooms where words would be held. The union sent out a bulletin calling the pause a turning point and asking members to document every time policy was used as a shortcut for assumption. The airport authority posted a brief that the service audit had begun and would include bias measure testing at customer touchpoints. Meridian teams walked the concourse with clipboards, not to catch, but to learn. Lynn's employer completed their review by week's end. They issued a short line that said the agent's contract had been terminated due to conduct in conflict with company standards. They wished her well and named no extra punishment. It was enough. She would have a long time to decide what she believed about that morning. Imani would not stand in judgment of that part. Consequence had arrived in her lane. The work of change belonged here. Late that night, in a quiet hotel room, Imani wrote a short post. Not a thread. Not a victory lap. She thanked the people who stood near her at the gate, the ones who filmed, the ones who took notes, the ones who did not walk away. She named the airline's leaders who had moved with care. She did not use the supervisors' names. She asked people not to harass frontline staff. She asked them to press for systems that protect dignity. She said she was fine. It was true, and also not. She ended with one sentence. Accountability is not a headline, it is a habit. Messages poured in again. Some told their own stories. Some asked for help. Some sent prayers. She read a few, then closed the app and opened a document titled Concourse Audit Plan. She had promised a Level 1 review in 48 hours. She would keep that promise. Deadlines, not feelings, are what change systems. At dawn, she walked the concourse with a small team and a cup of coffee she did not sip. She inspected the sign that marked boarding zones. She watched how agents greeted people when the lines grew long. She listened for tone and for the little words that make a person feel welcome or watched. She spoke with staff away from the counters, asked them what they needed, what they feared, what they had learned from screens that told them to be on alert without teaching them how to be fair. She wrote their answers down. She thanked them for their honesty. She told them the town hall would be next week, and that their voices would be the first at the mic. Consequences had begun to land where they should. In suspension notices and training calendars, in revised policies and public memo lines, in a contract addendum that would outlast the news cycle. The world had watched a woman hold the line while others moved it around her. Now the line itself would be repainted in the right place. It would take time. It would take people and will and checks on that will. But it was moving. Imani stood at the window then, the one that looked out over the tarmac where planes drifted slow. A ground crew in orange vests walked in a line toward a jet, bright against the gray. The morning was soft and honest. She placed her hand on the glass and let the cool meet her skin. This was not victory. This was work, the kind she had chosen long before a stranger touched her shoulder and tried to move her out of her own place. The stranger had taught her nothing new. She had taught the room something old. Dignity is a fact, not a favor. The consequences that followed would make that fact harder to ignore, easier to practice, and if she did her job well, impossible to forget. The week after the pause felt different inside the concourse. People walked the same floors, but their steps were softer. The carpet at B12 still had the same tired pattern, yet it seemed to hold new weight. Notices on small stands appeared near the ropes, simple and clear. Respect is our rule. Questions are not walls. A new number was printed in bold at the bottom of every boarding pass. It was not a call center. It was a person with authority. The title sat above it like a promise. Passenger ombuds. Imani moved through the space in plain clothes with a small team at her side. No press. No speeches. She listened to staff, not at counters, but beside vending machines in break rooms along service corridors that smelled of coffee and rubber. She asked what made their jobs hard, where their fear lived, and where grace got lost. She wrote their answers down. She knew the map could not change if it did not include every stress point. She learned which gates drew the hardest crowds, which shifts chipped away at patience most, which phrases in training were thin, because no one showed what they sounded like in real life. The first town hall took place on a Tuesday afternoon. Folding chairs filled a room behind security, under a wall of schedules. The union sat in front with pens and a stack of note cards. Supervisors stood along the wall at first, then took seats as the room relaxed. Imani offered only a short opening. She did not retell the moment at B12. Everyone knew the clip by then. She talked about habits and systems. She talked about how small choices add up. She talked about making the right thing easy and quick and safe. Stories rose. An agent with a soft voice told how she froze when a traveler's anger spiked, afraid a calm tone would be read as weakness by her manager. A security officer spoke about carrying lines he did not draw and how he wanted someone to back him when he chose restraint over force. A cleaner said she heard more than she wished in the early mornings and asked for a way to report the ugly small things she could not fix alone. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. Imani wrote it all on a board where everyone could see. She circled patterns as they formed. Evan sat in the second row. The paper in his hands shook. He had spent the week shadowing a mentor at a different gate, learning how to make process his ally, not his shield. He raised his hand. The room quieted for him. He said he had wanted to scan that pass and had felt something heavy press on him to wait. He said he would not let that weight push him again. He did not pretend bravery. He named fear, and then named what he would do the next time. The union steward beside him underlined 2 words on her card: back him. The audit Imani promised went live in 48 hours, as she said it would. Teams in blue vests with the crown mark appeared in small packs. They did not arrive to punish. They arrived to watch. They stood at corners and listened to tone. They flagged bottlenecks that made tempers flare for no good reason. They changed the placement of signs so the most basic questions answered themselves. They removed a tape barrier that had forced 2 lines to cross for years and created a wider lane for wheelchairs and strollers. They added a small bell at counters that said, "We see you if the agent looked down at a screen too long." Small things, obvious things, things that make dignity the default without a lecture. The Ombuds program launched like a test balloon, and by Wednesday afternoon the first call came. It came from Gate C9, where a traveler in a hoodie and a tired face stood in the wrong line. 3 minutes later, a woman in a gray blazer with an Ombuds badge arrived. She smiled, asked a few clear questions, scanned the pass herself, and moved the traveler to the right place with a nod that said this is normal, not a fight. She then thanked the agent and left a note on the station tablet with 2 lines. Signage at C9 confuses first-timers. Relabel before dinner rush. It was not a miracle. It was a fix. The nurse who had stood with Imani at B12 received a letter at home with a simple thanks, a phone number if she ever needed support, and a note that her record had helped. She pinned it on her fridge for her children to see, because children need to see what showing up looks like. The veteran got a different letter with a smaller thank you and a larger request, asking if he would sit on a panel for the new training day. He said yes with a pen that scratched. He had not asked to be part of anything. Now he was. The teenager who had streamed the moment cut his live into a short clip and showed it at school in a civics class. His teacher asked him what he had learned. He said that filming matters, but standing matters too, and being calm is not the same as being weak. He did not say he slept badly for 2 nights because the room had been too loud in his head. He watched other clips online that were not resolved. He wondered how many ombuds it would take to change all that. He drew a picture of a number on his notebook and then folded the page away. He wanted a job one day at a place that fixed things in daylight. He wrote ops in a small box next to his dream. Lynn stayed quiet for days. Online, people shouted both ways around her name. Imani did not join that noise. She had spoken her request the day it mattered. No harassment of frontline people. She meant that. Lynn's firm released a short statement about the end of her contract. After a week, a simple note appeared from Lynn herself, posted late at night. It was not a plea. It did not chase sympathy. It said she had watched the video again and did not like the person she saw. It said she was going to listen, to learn, and to step away from work for a while. It was not a clean bow. Life rarely offers one. It was a start. The airline CEO kept his promises, one by one. The Ombud's number stayed on the passes. The training modules were rewritten with staff at the table, not as an audience. Managers were measured on how fast they chose fairness under pressure, not just how fast they boarded planes. A new field in the incident system asked a simple extra question. Did you choose to scan before you chose to doubt? Data started to draw its own picture. Habits began to turn. Imani did not let the story name her only as the person at the counter. She returned to the quiet work that had always been hers. At 6 a.m. and midnight, she read reports from teams who walked concourses in 3 cities. She corrected a clause in a contract to make sure training hours were paid, not added on top of shifts. She sent a short note to legal when someone tried to call an apology a gesture in a draft. She crossed out the word. She wrote repair. On a Thursday, she stood again at the glass wall above the tarmac. Morning rain made the ground shine. A plane rolled into the gate and stopped. Workers in orange vests stepped into their marks like a dance. The jet bridge hummed as it extended. then settled with a heavy kiss against the plane's door. The sound was the same as it had always been, but something else was new. A small sign, tucked near the hinge of the bridge, carried the crown mark and 4 short words. "This gate holds grace." Most people would not see it. The ones who needed it would. There were gains and there were slips. One agent forgot and reached for a radio before he reached for the scanner. An ombuds was called and arrived in 90 seconds. One traveler snapped at a clerk who was kind and tired, and the clerk gave a tight smile that held. The ombuds watched and later brought that clerk water and 5 minutes off the floor to breathe. Small patches were made everywhere. Not perfect, better. A month later, the town hall moved to a larger room. The union steward brought a stack of green cards this time. Green meant wins. Red meant problems. The pile of green grew taller than the red by the end. Staff spoke about catching bias in themselves in the moment and choosing a different line of words. Someone used the phrase "scan first, judge never," and the room clapped, not because it was catchy, but because it told the truth plain. Imani did not keep score out loud. She was careful with credit. She thanked the people who had moved when it was hard. She held back warmth from people who tried to take a victory lap after delaying what was obvious. She protected Evan without turning him into a symbol. He kept showing up quiet and on time. One morning, he scanned a pass, heard the beep, and looked up with a soft grin that meant he had learned to trust the simple light. He wore that grin for only a second. Then he got back to work. The world beyond the airport kept doing what it does. Other clips rose and fell. Some hurt. Some healed. Imani did not chase them. She stayed where her feet could make a difference. She offered the ombuds model to 2 other hubs and asked their leaders to remove the brand and keep the bones if it helped them move faster. She shared the training out. She answered 3 calls from small regional airports that did not have big budgets but had big hearts. She told them to start with chairs in a circle and a board on a wall. Truth wants a place to sit. On a quiet evening, she opened her laptop and typed the last line of the audit. The concourse has begun to change its weather. She saved the file, leaned back, and let her hands rest. For a long moment, she did nothing. She thought about the push. She thought about the hands that helped. She thought about the years behind her and the ones ahead. She thought about how heavy dignity had been that day and how light it felt now that more shoulders carried it. She would always be asked to tell the story. She would keep telling it this way. Not as a tale of a hero, but as a record of a room that woke up when one person refused to be moved. The ending was not a scene. It was a habit. People at gates made better choices. Passengers felt seen sooner. The scanner beeped and meant what it should. The ombuds walked and watched and eased. The building held itself a little taller. If you made it this far, you are part of that room. Keep watching. Keep standing. And if you believe stories like this should be heard and learned from, hit that subscribe button to support and share your thoughts. Your voice turns moments into change.